Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session for surgical case presentations. As you know, we are conducting a series of surgical case presentations every 2 weeks to help you in your preparation for these presentations in your actual final MBBS. So today we have Shumedha Ghosh who will be presenting the case. Before that, I'd like Dr. Antarip Bhattacharya to say a few words in introduction to her. Over to you, Antarip.
Hello everyone. So welcome to another session on case presentation. So as Sushmita said, we'll be hosting these case presentations once a week or maybe once in 2 weeks as per schedule and convenience. So today we have Sumedha Ghosh who has assigned a case. Will show you the case, and as usual, those of you who haven't attended the last session, let me just give you a brief intro. So what we are doing is we are assigning a short like a case, a summary of a case like this, as you can see on the screen, that an old man presents with a left-sided groin swelling as depicted in the picture. The patient can reduce the swelling on lying down. On examination, calf impulse is present. Scrotum is not swollen and testes can be filled separately, but one cannot get above the swelling. So the student who is going to present is asked to elicit the relevant history and prepare the case sheet accordingly. So she was assigned this case and the picture accompanying that, and then she had to take relevant history via WhatsApp, and then she had to prepare a case sheet accordingly. So in your actual exam, you'll have to ask the patient about the history in the local language, but here we are restricting ourselves to English for the time being so that everyone can understand what's going on. So now let's move on to the history, the screenshots of the chat, the WhatsApp chat. Yes, so as you can see, she started with the patient particulars on the top left. So the patient particulars, the age, the religion, the occupation, the address, and then after completion, we move on to the chief complaint. So here the chief complaint was that the person has noticed a swelling on in the groin, and he also has pain sometimes along with it. So after the reply that I have swelling in my groin, Shuman has asked that which side. So of course that is a very important point, that whenever someone is telling you about anything that can be bilateral, you need to ask about the side. So here we have a left-sided swelling, and then we talk about the onset, like 2-3 months back. Then duration, if it's applicable. Here it's not applicable as such. If you can ask about the pain, but the swelling is there for usually the whole day, and we have to also ask whether the swelling is getting reduced when the patient is lying down or not, because that is a feature of reducibility. So as you might have guessed from the picture and from the overall history that you can see on your screens, this is going to be a case of hernia, right? So this is going to be a case of left-sided hernia, and on examination, proper examination, we can find out whether it's a direct or an indirect inguinal hernia. So this is so via this web series, we have tried to give you as much accurate data as possible, but of course in your exam you'll have the patient in front of you, and you'll definitely have more accurate information. You'll be able to examine the patient, and you'll be able to determine whether it's a direct or an indirect hernia. So a few points that I want to highlight in the history is that you need to ask in detail about the swelling, like whether the swelling has descended into the scrotum, or whether there is similar swelling on the right side, whether the pain is near the swelling or it's referred to somewhere else, the nature of the pain. As you can see, the patient has said that it's a dragging sort of pain, and then the aggravating and relieving factors. And then one of the important factors is that we have to ask whether there is any straining factors, because once we are more or less sure that this is a patient of hernia, we have to pay attention to the facts, pay attention to the factors that cause hernia, which in a lot of cases is an increased intra-abdominal pressure. Patients of chronic cough, COPD, patients with asthma, patients who have constipation, urinary retention, they tend to strain a lot and increase the intra-abdominal pressure. This increase in intra-abdominal pressure finally causes the hernia. So that point is very important while taking the history, which she has asked, as you can see. Next, another next other important factors are, as usual, like addiction history, like any other diseases like diabetes, like hypertension, and next, if the patient has received any treatment for the swelling, family history, personal history. So you know those things which are sort of not that important, but definitely you have to ask in the exam and have it in your answer sheets. So now let's move on to the case sheet that Sumedha has prepared. Okay, so as you can see, we have the patient particulars, occupation, address, date of admission, date of examination. Next, we move on to the chief complaint. The chief complaint in this case is swelling in the left groin for 3 months and pain over the swelling for 2 months. So here you have to pay attention to the fact that we write the chief complaint in chronological order. So the swelling is for the more duration, that is for the 3 months, and the pain over the swelling is for 2 months. Next, we move on to history of present illness. The history of present illness is about we have to expand the, yes, chief complaint. So the swelling and the pain. So she has done that it was insidious in onset and it appeared first in the groin. Then it has gradually increased in size over the last 3 months. Next, the swelling disappears completely when the patient lies down, which is a feature of reducibility. If it doesn't gets reduced on lying down, then it's a not so good prognostic factor, and we have to try and operate the patient as quickly as possible because the hernia can get strangulated if it's not reduced like that. Sometimes hernias get reduced spontaneously when the patient lies down, or sometimes it can happen that the patient manually can reduce the hernia, which is known as taxis. We can also try and reduce the hernia, but it's preferable that you ask the patient to do it in the exam because the patient is the best person to reduce the hernia. He knows how to reduce it without any discomfort as such. Next, she has talked about the pain in the next point, that the patient complains of a dull, dragging type of pain over the swelling for the last 2 months. The pain increases with straining as the swelling increases, but subsides when the patient lies down. There is no radiation of pain. So next we move on to past history. Okay, so she has mentioned bladder and bowel habits here because it's sort of relevant in this case. You can mention it here. You can mention it under personal history as well. So in the bladder habit, one point is that the patient complains of hesitancy, diminished flow, increased frequency, etc. So we have features of maybe benign prostatic hyperplasia. So 65-year-old male, it's quite a probable cause. So this can be a contributing factor, or this can be a separate associated factor. Whatever it is, if the patient tells you about a complaint, you have to mention it in your answer sheet and you have to sort of ask the patient a few more details about it. What happens is, suppose you have prepared about hernia, prepared about, say, CA breast, you have prepared about gallbladder, etc. And then when you get a case of hernia, you tend to forget about everything. So you only focus on hernia. What can happen is the examiner can also ask you about, suddenly he can ask you about BPH also. Since you have this history of this, hesitancy, increased frequency, etc., the examiner can go into that area also. To avoid that, what a lot of people does is that they tend to sort of ignore this complaint. They just delete this complaint that the patient has made, which is number one, not sort of ethical and not to be done. And number two, if the examiner sort of knows that the patient has this feature, it can happen that the examiner has examined the patient beforehand, okay, or maybe you are appearing for the exam on the third day, and maybe on the second day and on the first day the examiner knows that this patient has this history, someone else has elicited this history, and you just skip it. So it's going to be a disparity. So a word of warning, a word of caution here is that you should not ignore anything that the patient says. It should be in your answer sheet, and you should be sort of ready to answer something about these points. See, once you go to the final exam, it's not that you are not going to appear for the final exam without studying about BPH, right? It's already a very important topic for theory. So you will definitely know something about BPH. So please don't ignore these, extra complaints that the patient can have. And if the examiner goes into that area, you should answer the questions related to that area. And there is no need to be discouraged and no need to feel sad that you had prepared hernia so well, but all the examiner did was ask you about BPH. So it can happen. A lot of times examiners stick to questions like general survey, stick to questions like local examination, and they don't even go into the actual case. So it's not that you get a case of hernia and everything will be asked about hernia. Okay. So next, let's move on to the next point. So the patient has a history of chronic cough, mostly at night, for the last 6 years. So it can be a contributing factor here as well. Next, past history. So the patient had a surgery for a swelling on the back, for which he had been hospitalized for 2 days. There were no postoperative complications. So this swelling on the back can be a lipoma sort of a thing, which is like a daycare surgery, and there was no complication. So you have to mention it in the past history. If the patient has said that, you can't just skip it. No history of pulmonary TB, that is no history of any major illness you can write, or you can mention some major illnesses along with that. And there is no history of any diabetes or hypertension as per the patient. So next we move on to personal history. So personal history, the patient is married, has 2 sons, lives with his wife. I think he had said that in the history section. So you should mention that here as well. In addiction history, under the personal history, he smokes a packet of BD per day since the last 40 years. So that can be a contributing factor to the chronic cough, the COPD-like features which the patient has, which ultimately has maybe contributed to the development of this hernia. Sleep, it is disturbed due to increased frequency of urination at night. So again, features of prostatitis, again features of BPH here. Appetite is normal. So bladder, bowel, sleep, appetite, and addiction, you can group it under personal history, or you can write a separate addiction history as well. A lot of times people get too much bothered about these things, that whether to write addiction history separately or whether to write it under personal history. To be very honest, it doesn't matter as long as you have it in your answer sheet and as long as you don't write it at the first place. So you just can't write patient particulars and then just move on to addiction history. That's stupidity. But once you have the patient particulars, the chief complaint, the history of present illness, and the past history, then you can write these things. You can group it under something. You may not group it. Whatever you feel like, you can do. Just the points and the relevant history should be there. There will be some examiners who will be, nitpicking about these things, but they are rare. And ultimately, you are going to focus on your case and you're going to focus on your presentation. Next is family history. So there is no history of any hereditary diseases in the family, uh, any diabetes or hypertension. Next is treatment history. So treatment history is the history that you are going to take about the current disease that the patient has been admitted for. Here we are concentrating on the groin swelling. So she had asked that whether the patient has received any treatment for the swelling, and the patient had said that he is taking painkillers, that is analgesics, for the swelling. Next is allergy history, that the patient does not have any allergy to any food or any drug. Next, we move on to the physical examination. So in the physical examination, we begin with general survey and then we'll move on to the local examination. So in general survey, the patient is alert, conscious, cooperative. You have to write about the build, about the nourishment. So it's going to be normal in a lot of cases. In cancer patients, the build may not be average. The patient may be malnourished. The patient may be cachectic. The gait is normal. Decubitus is of choice. Next, we look at those 5 features like pallor, icterus, sinuses, clubbing, edema. So they were absent in this patient. Neck veins and neck glands, that is the cervical lymph nodes, they are not normal. You should write that they are, neck veins are not engorged and the neck glands are not palpable. we are not talking about any abnormality or normality here. The neck veins are engorged if there is any venous stasis, if there is any increased venous pressure, and the lymph nodes are cervical lymph nodes are enlarged in a lot of cases. It can be benign causes, it can be malignant causes. So that is why we need to look at them, and they can be palpable or they can be not palpable. Next, the vitals like pulse, blood pressure, respiratory rate. It should be respiratory rate, ideally, not respiration, and temperature. If you have a thermometer, you can measure the temperature. If you don't, you may write that temperature is not raised. Don't write it's normal. You can write it's not raised, and there is no obvious deformity or pigmentation over the swelling, I suppose. So you can group it under the local examination as well. Next, local examination. Of course, we begin with the left inguinal region because the patient complains of a swelling in the left side. So I had mentioned this in our last webinar that we had a case of breast in our last webinar, and we should begin with the affected side. So we begin our examination in standing position at first, and it's divided into inspection. Those typical divisions of any examination. So in inspection, we have inspected that we have a left side swelling, so it was depicted in the picture also, and it does not extend to the scrotum. You have to mention an approximate size. If you have a measuring tape, well and good. If you don't, you have to mention an approximate size. The shape here is globular, the surface is smooth, and the margins are rounded. That is, it's not sharp. Next, we have yes, expansile calf impulse. This is very important when you are examining for any swelling. Hernia will have calf impulse. So here we have an expansile calf impulse is present. So what you do, you have to carry out this calf impulse both on inspection as well as on palpation. So on inspection, you ask the patient to cough, turn the head away from you and cough. So the patient should turn away from you and cough. This was done even before the corona pandemic, and now it's more important that the patient does not cough directly on your face. So the patient should turn away his or her face and then cough, and you should look at the swelling, whether it's bulging when the patient is coughing or not. Skin over the swelling, no visible peristalsis, and no deviation of penis. And the scrotum, examination of scrotum is very important in hernia cases of males, of course, because a lot of times complete hernia can, feel like a hydrocele, or a hydrocele can feel like a hernia, sort of this. So we have to distinguish those two swellings, scrotal swellings. So in this case, the scrotum is not swelling. Next, we move on to palpation. So in palpation, temperature is important, tenderness is important, and another very important feature is that we cannot get above the swelling because it is an inguinoscrotal swelling. So because it's a hernia, the content, it has descended from the inguinal canal, right? So that is why we cannot get above the swelling. If it was a testicular swelling, if it was a hydrocele, we could have got above the swelling. So that is a very important distinguishing feature, and you have to mention it both in hydrocele as well as in hernia. So in any immunoscrotal or scrotal swelling, you have to mention whether you can get above the swelling or not. Next, again mention about the size and shape, that is on palpation, how you are feeling the swelling. And consistency, it's extra in palpation. You can't feel the consistency on that is on inspection. So here the consistency is soft and elastic, and the swelling is above and medial to the pubic tubercle. And the testis can be felt separately. So this is also a very important point. The testis can be felt separately. And you have to examine the patient in standing position, and then you have to examine the patient on lying down. So when the patient lies down, the swelling is reduced completely and spontaneously. Next, we carry out deep ring occlusion test. This deep ring occlusion test is negative. And next we have the examination of the epididymis and the spermatic cord, and they are normal. Next, percussion. So you can percuss above the swelling. So here we are getting a resonant note. So we might suspect maybe a part of the bowel as a content, okay, or the omentum. And on auscultation, bowel sound is present over the swelling. Next, we have to, this is very important, I want to highlight this point, that please don't forget to examine the normal side. It's very, very important that you examine the normal side. So here in this case, we have to examine the right inguinoscrotal region as well, and you have to mention it in your answer sheet also. So it's going to be a huge discredit if you don't examine the normal side. Next, we examine the tone of the abdominal muscles. So we have to like assess whether the abdominal muscle tone is all right or it's lax abdomen, so the patient has a chance of developing hernia or not. And here the patient has poor tone of abdominal muscles, and bulging is seen in the flanks on straight leg rising test. So that is a feature that the patient has a lax abdominal wall, abdominal muscle, maybe due to age, maybe due to chronic straining. There can be a lot of factors. And you have to mention in examination of the abdomen, I have mentioned this previously also, that in females you have to mention about per vaginal, and in males, and in both males and females you have to mention about per rectal examination. You may not have to do it, but you have to mention that it was not done. Next, we move on to the systemic examination. So here, examination of abdomen is very important. The other systemic examinations are just should be normal. So here, the shape is normal, umbilicus is central. There is a swelling present in the left inguinal region. Expansal cuff impulse is seen. Genitalia appears normal. Examination of genitalia more important in these inguinal swellings. Next, we have to examine the abdomen. That is, whether we have any tenderness, whether the abdomen is soft, okay, whether there is any rigidity. These are normal examinations that you need to carry out. Bowel sounds. So you can either divide the examination of abdomen into inspection, palpation, percussion, or auscultation, or you can, if you don't have much time, because the most important thing in the final exam is that you won't get much time. So you have to elicit the history. You have to write the, you have to fill up this case sheet very quickly. So if you don't have time, you can just write it like this. Next, examination of respiratory system. So we are just skipping the examination of the other systems here. We'll be providing you with these model case sheets, so you can have a look at them. So let's just go through them. Let's just skip these parts. Last, we move on to the summary. So in summary, as I mentioned in our last presentation also, that whatever relevant finding you have found out in your case, you have to mention it in the summary. So here you can see that we have Mr. ABC, 65-year-old male taxi driver, who presents with a swelling in the left groin for the last 3 months and pain over the swelling for the last 2 months. So these two were the most important complaint that the patient had made. The swelling appeared insidiously, gradually increased in size over the last 3 months, disappears completely when the patient dies down, but reappears on walking, coughing. Okay. Next, he complains of a dull dragging pain over the swelling for the last 2 months, which increases on straining, subsides on lying down. Bowel habits are normal. Patient has difficulty in micturition, so very important complaint here, which you need to highlight in the summary also. Complaints of chronic cough for the last 6 years, which is more at night. This is also a relevant history in this case. So if the patient complained of maybe dyspepsia, if the patient complained of pain in his whole body, then this was not relevant in the case summary. But these things like chronic cough, whether the bowel habits are normal, whether the urine, the passing of urine, the micturition is normal, these are important. Next, to move on to the physical examination findings. So general survey, you can say is normal, or you can write a very short line about it, that the vitals are within normal limits and we have no pallor, those things. You can either expand this point. If you don't have time, you can write it like that also. On local examination, this is important. You have to write about the local examination in a bit detail, because that's a very important thing that we are focusing on. So just summarize what you have written in the previous parts. Okay, so last we have provisional diagnosis. So this is a case of left-sided reducible direct inguinal hernia containing intestine without any features of complication at present. So whenever you are mentioning hernia, you can mention that whether it has any feature of complication or not. Complication means irreducibility, strangulation, etc., which you have to elicit in the history and sort of examine during the local examination. So it is reducible. That is also a very important point that you need to mention, and whether it's a direct or an indirect inguinal hernia. So next, investigations, you can mention these investigations. A lot of students don't mention it in the answer sheet. The examiner usually asks about them. So it's up to you. If you have time, you can mention it. It's not compulsory. So you can finish off with maybe differential diagnosis, and you can finish off with provisional diagnosis. Investigation, it's up to you. So here, yes, we have to prepare the patient for operation. So we have to, carry out those pre-operative evaluations. So I have discussed that in our section on anesthesia. What are the pre-operative evaluation that we do for PAC? PAC is pre-anesthetic checkup. Next, the definitive investigation can be USG of the inguinal region. Uh, that is hernia, hydrocele. These are mostly clinical diagnosis, but you can carry out an USG of the inguinal region and HR USG, that is a high resolution USG. And here, since the patient has features of prostatitis and stuff, so USG of KUB region, KUBP, so kidney, ureter, urinary bladder, and prostate. Pulmonary function test because the patient has chronic cough. ECHO, 65-year-old with chronic cough. It can be pulmonary edema due to cardiac failure also. So ECHO is very important. And also in PAC, if the age is more than 45, usually ECHO is preferred nowadays. So next we move on to the differential diagnosis. So the differential diagnosis can be, yes, the first and most important differential diagnosis is that it is not a direct inguinal hernia, it's an indirect inguinal hernia. Next is a femoral hernia, a congenital hydrocele, encysted hydrocele of cord, lipoma of cord. So these are the swellings, inguinal swellings, the typical differential diagnosis that we have. So we are finished with the discussion about the history and the case sheet. So now I would like to hand over the session to Shumedha to present the case, and then we move on to the questions.
Okay, so should I share the summary?
Yes.
Should I say the summary?
Yes.
Okay. The patient is the patient, Mr. ABC, is a 65-year-old male taxi driver, and he complains of swelling in his left inguinal region over the last 3 months and pain over the last 2 months. The swelling has gradually increased in size. And it increases when the patient does any straining work like walking and coughing, and it goes down it regresses completely and spontaneously upon lying down. Then about the pain, the patient also complains of pain, which is a dragging sort of pain, and it increases upon straining and decreases on lying down. The patient, the bowel habits are normal, and the patient complains of difficulty during micturition. He also complains of a chronic cough for the last 6 to 7 years, which is mostly at night. Then on systemic examination, his on general survey, his vitals are within normal limits. On local examination, we find that there is a swelling over the left inguinal region, and this swelling is globular, about 6 centimeter into 4 centimeter in size, and it regresses completely when the patient lies down. The opposite side is normal, and there are no obvious abnormalities in the genitalia, like in the scrotum, that we cannot get over the swelling, and the scrotum is not swollen. And the deep ring occlusion test is negative, and then on systemic examination, they are also within normal limits.
Okay, so based on your examination findings, what do you think is the provisional diagnosis?
This is a case of left-sided, reducible, direct inguinal hernia, and which contains intestine, and there are no signs of any complication at present.
Why do you think it's a direct inguinal hernia and not indirect?
Because the patient is an elderly man, 65-year-old, and he has features of he has training factors, and also since he's old, so there can be laxity in the muscles, and most often direct inguinal hernias are the one which are not complete, and the swelling is globular, so this scrotum is not swollen, and we see that the swelling tends to come forwards, not downwards and forwards, and upon deep ring occlusion test we see that it is negative. So this is a direct
Right.
inguinal hernia.
So an incomplete indirect inguinal hernia can also not come down to the scrotum. So yeah, the other points are correct. So through what opening, or through what does the indirect inguinal hernia come out, and through what does the direct inguinal hernia come out?
The indirect inguinal hernia comes out from the deep ring, and the direct inguinal hernia comes out from the superficial ring through the Hasselbeck's triangle.
Through the floor of the Hasselbeck's triangle, right? So can you tell me the boundaries of the Hasselbeck's triangle?
Yeah, medially there is the lateral border of the rectus sheath. Laterally there are the inferior epigastric vessels, and the base is formed by the inguinal ligaments.
I think your video froze for some time, so can you please repeat that?
Okay. The Hasselbeck's triangle boundary are: medially there is the lateral border of the rectus sheath, laterally are the inferior epigastric vessels, and at the base there is the inguinal ligament.
Right. And what is the deep inguinal ring?
The deep inguinal ring is an inherent opening in the fascia transversalis.
Right. And where is it situated?
It is situated 1.25 centimeter above the mid-inguinal point.
What is the difference between mid-inguinal point and midpoint of inguinal ligament?
Mid-inguinal point is it is the midpoint of the line drawn between the anterior superior iliac spine and the pubic tubercle. And sorry, I don't know.
What is the extent of the inguinal ligament?
From the ASIS to the pubic tubercle.
Right. So the midpoint of the inguinal ligament is going to be the midpoint between the ASIS and the pubic tubercle. And the mid-inguinal point is going to be the midpoint between the ASIS and the pubic symphysis. So if you draw a line between the ASIS and the pubic symphysis, the midpoint is the mid-inguinal point. And if you draw a line, or you just take the inguinal ligament, that is a point between the ASIS and the pubic tubercle, that is the midpoint of the inguinal ligament. So it's a very favorite question of a lot of examiners because they sound similar, but they are not. And this deep ring, it is related to the mid-inguinal point, as you have correctly said, and not the midpoint of inguinal ligament. So we need to be careful about that. Another thing is that in Hasselbeck's triangle, the medial boundary is the lateral border of the rectus abdominis muscle and not the rectus sheath. Okay, so it's the rectus muscle, and the lateral border, it forms the medial border of the Hasselbeck's triangle, and the other boundaries were correct. Okay, and what is the superficial inguinal ring?
It is an opening in the external oblique aponeurosis.
Right. So you have already mentioned about the investigations, so there is no point in asking about them again. So what would you like to do with this patient?
First, I would take him for the routine investigations and assess his fitness for the surgery, and then basing on his age, we should perform a hernioplasty operation for this patient.
Okay, so what do you mean by hernioplasty?
Hernioplasty is basically herniotomy plus repairing of the posterior wall with a mesh.
So what is the difference between a herniotomy, a herniorrhaphy, and a hernioplasty?
Herniotomy is just excision of the sac and reduction of the contents into the abdominal cavity. Herniorrhaphy is reduction of the contents and also repair of the posterior wall just by tissue suturing. And hernioplasty is herniotomy plus repairing of the posterior wall along with the mesh.
Yes. So whenever we are using a prosthesis like a mesh, the word becomes plasty. So in tympanoplasty, so everything, everywhere, this same principle is applicable. Okay. So what can be complications of a hernia?
If a hernia is not treated, then it can undergo complications like obstruction, strangulation, incarceration, um, and at later stages, it can also undergo lead to abdominal compartment syndrome.
Okay. What is the difference between an obstruction and a strangulation?
In obstruction, there is intestinal obstruction, but the blood supply is intact. But in strangulation, there is intestinal obstruction along with disrupted blood supply.
So on examination, how would they be different, like features of obstruction and features of strangulation? You can just mention one point which can differentiate between.
In case of a strangulated hernia, there would be tenderness over the swelling, and the skin would be discolored to a bluish red.
Yes. So in a lot of cases of obstruction, the sac, the swelling is in a lot of time it is painless. But in strangulation, it is definitely going to be painful because we have a loss of blood supply. And what is an incarcerated hernia?
An incarcerated hernia is one in which there is impaction of some material like feces, which can lead to infection of the sac.
An obstruction. And in that case, on examination, you are going to have this, putty-like feel. Whenever you are putting a finger, it would be indented, sort of. Okay, so can you name some other complications? Okay, one complication is that there can be a collection of fluid, which is known as it is hydrocele of the hernial sac. Okay, so here also we have hydrocele of hernia sac and hernia of hydrocele sac, but the most common thing to occur is this, that the sac, there can be fluid accumulation inside the sac, so we can also have this hydrocele of the hernial sac. Okay, so what is the mesh made up of in hernioplasty?
It can be either a synthetic mesh or it can be a biological material. So generally synthetic meshes are like a polypropylene mesh, and
Right.
Biological material can be made of. Okay, sorry, my
Yeah.
Wi-Fi got disrupted.
Okay, no problem. So we were talking about the materials of mesh. So, okay, and what is the name of the operation that you are most likely going to perform in this patient?
It is a Liechtenstein tension-free hernioplasty.
Right. Can you name some named hernias, some named inguinal hernias, or some named hernias?
Meckel's hernia, sorry, Litter's hernia, and it contains the Meckel's diverticulum. Amiot's hernia, which contains the appendix. Gibbon's hernia, which is hernia plus hydrocele. And Spigelian, no, that is not an inguinal hernia. And
What is
Richter's
Richter's
hernia.
hernia? Yeah. What is that?
Richter's hernia is one in which the instead of the bowel, the circumference of the bowel gets trapped inside the sac.
Okay. So what is an omentocele and what is an enterocele?
Omentocele is one in which inside the sac the omentum gets trapped, and in enterocele the bowel gets trapped.
And how are you going to differentiate between these two?
Upon palpation, an enterocyl feels soft and elastic, and an omentocyl feels doughy in consistency. On auscultation, okay, on if we try to reduce the hernial sac, then in enterocyl, the first part is difficult to reduce, but the last part goes in easily. And in omentocyl, the first part is easy to reduce, but the last part is difficult to reduce. On auscultation, vowel sounds can be heard from the enterocyl. And sometimes if there is a recurrent hernia and the skin is thin, then in case of enterocyl, we can see visible peristalsis.
Right. So, what is a hernia? I didn't ask this question, but what is a hernia? So we should begin with that actually.
A hernia is an abnormal protrusion of a viscus or a part of it through the wall of its containing cavity.
I think your network got a bit disturbed again. So can you just repeat the definition?
Okay. Hernia is the abnormal protrusion of a viscus or a part of it through the wall of its containing cavity.
Right. And can you name some other hernias apart from inguinal hernia?
Femoral hernia, then Spigelian hernia, epigastric hernia, congenital diaphragmatic hernia.
Spigelian hernia is a very rare type of hernia, so I would not recommend don't mention it at first. I know the name sounds fancy, and a lot of during my final year also, a lot of us used to mention that, and our professors used to get disappointed. And so, yeah, femoral hernia. Okay, and what else did you say? Yes, epigastric hernia. So, what is the other name of epigastric hernia?
Ventral hernias.
What is it commonly known as? Or what is it actually? Like, we have an epigastric swelling, right? And something is coming out, and that is why it is a hernia. So, what is it?
Yes.
What is epigastric hernia?
I can't understand the question.
So, suppose what is the content of the epigastric hernia? Is it, say, the stomach? Is it, say,
okay.
bowel?
The preperitoneal fat.
Right. So, epigastric hernia is also known as fatty hernia of the linea alba. So, what happens is that we have a weakness in the linea alba, and through that the fat is coming out. So, we have to remove that fat. So, in say inguinal hernia, if the content is bowel, we can't just remove it, right? We have to reduce it, and we have to carry out a hernioplasty. But in epigastric hernia, we remove the content because it's just fat. So we can just remove the content and then carry out a repair. So this is a very common question, that what is the other name of epigastric hernia? Okay. So deep ring occlusion test. So why is it positive in this case, and when is it going to be negative?
So I said this was negative in this case because this is a direct inguinal hernia.
And when it is going to be positive?
It is going to be positive in case of indirect inguinal hernia.
Right. So this is how you differentiate. Okay. So you have mentioned in the differential diagnosis that it can be a femoral. It can be what?
It can be a indirect inguinal hernia. It can be a femoral hernia. It can be a congenital hydrocele. It can be an encysted hydrocele of the cord or lipoma of the cord.
It can also be Saphena varix, right? It's usually Saphena varix is differential diagnosis for femoral hernia, not for this one. Okay, so let's move on to the management. So can you just tell me the basic steps of Lichtenstein's hernioplasty?
First we do the position of the patient is supine, Then we do the antiseptic dripping and the cleaning. After that, the incision is inguinal incision. That is, the incision is taken about 2 centimeter and parallel to the inguinal ligament. In a single incision, we cut the skin and the two fascias, that is the Scarpa's fascia and the Camper's fascia. And after that, we expose the external oblique aponeurosis. We give a nick in the aponeurosis and gradually open it up. Then we find the a deep ring, and we extend the incision. And when we okay, before that, we had to coagulate the vessels which we encountered during the incisions, like the epigastric vessels and the pudendal vessels. Then when we open up the external oblique aponeurosis, we find the cord, a spermatic cord. We insert a Penrose drain or a gauge piece and lift it up. Sorry. The external oblique aponeurosis, when it is cut, then we need to retract it. The upper flap is retracted towards the conjoint tendon and the lower flap is retracted towards the inguinal ligament. Then the ilio-hypogastric nerve is there. We have to retract it along with either of the flap of the external oblique aponeurosis. Then the spermatic cord is retracted with a Penrose drain. Then
what are the contents of spermatic cord?
The contents of the spermatic cord are 3 vessels, that is the testicular artery, the cremasteric artery, and the artery to the vas deferens. Then there are the testicular lymphatics. There is the pampaniform plexus. In case of females, there is the. In case of female, there is the. Sorry, so it's the spermatic cord. Okay. The other structures
What is the main what is the main content of the spermatic cord? You have mentioned about what? You have mentioned about the vessels, right?
Yes.
What is the main structure?
The vas deferens.
Right. So that is the main structure. Then next we have some vessels. The arteries are the 3 arteries, as you have mentioned: the testicular artery, the artery to the vas, and the cremasteric artery, right? Next we have the veins, which is the pampaniform plexus of veins. We have lymphatics. So we are done with artery, we are done with vein, we are done with lymph. Next we have some nerves. So do you know the names of the nerves, the important ones?
There are some sympathetic nerves, and
2 nerves are very important in this inguinal region. Whenever we are talking about inguinal canal or the spermatic cord, there are 2 nerves which we need to pay attention to, and these are the nerves which can lead to problems after the surgery also. So they both begin with I, if I may give a hint.
Ilioinguinal nerve and the iliohypogastric.
Yeah, the iliohypogastric is not as such a content of the spermatic cord. It is actually above the, so it is important in from the surgical point of view. But if you are talking about the anatomy, one of them is the ilioinguinal nerve, but it is a partial content. Okay, and what is the nerve? The important nerve, that is the complete content of the spermatic cord. Okay, it is the genital branch of the genitofemoral nerve. Okay, so if you say genitofemoral nerve, examiners are going to ask you whether it's the femoral branch or whether it's the genital branch. Obviously, here we are going to have the genital branch of the genitofemoral nerve. So that is one. The second is sympathetic nerves, as you have mentioned, and the third is a partial content, which is the ilioinguinal nerve. And from the operative point of view, we should also be careful about the iliohypogastric nerve when we are, incising the skin above the, the skin above the inguinal region. So one main content is vas deferens, 3 arteries, veins, lymphatics, nerves. Nerves can also be like 3: genitofemoral nerve, ilioinguinal nerve, and partially genitofemoral nerve, sympathetic nerve, and partially ilioinguinal nerve. And we have the covering, which is the like tunica vaginalis, the remains of the processus vaginalis. So this is about the spermatic cord, and it is a content of the inguinal canal in males. So what is the content in females?
Round ligament of the uterus.
Right. So you can continue with the operative, like just the basic
Okay.
steps.
Okay. After we retract the spermatic cord from the operative field, then we carefully remove the cremasteric fascia and internal spermatic fascia from the spermatic cord, and then we expose the hernial sac. We can dissect the sac and from the fundus to the neck and reduce the contents, and after it is twisted and then inserted back into the cavity, and then a mesh is placed. The mesh is attached at its medial end to the
Before placing the mesh, do we have to do anything with the mesh?
we have to round the medial border of the mesh, and on the lateral side we have to make two limbs. The superior limb would be wider and the inferior limb would be narrower. That is at the junction of the 2/3 and 1/3. Then we affix the medial edge of the mesh to the near the pubic tubercle, but not to the periosteum, but to the fibers of the ilioinguinal ligament, and the inferior edge of the mesh is also it is sutured to the inguinal ligament, and the two limbs are they go around the spermatic cord so as to create a neo-deep ring, and the upper border is sutured to the conjoint tendon. Then we suture up the external oblique aponeurosis and create a superficial inguinal ring, and after that we close the layers.
Right. So the main principle here is to create a new deep and superficial ring. Right. Okay. So I think that's more or less enough for today's discussion. If you have any other questions, you are free to ask.
So in this patient, since he's complaining of cough since 6 to 7 years, so don't we have to write anything in the systemic examination in the respiratory part?
Yes, of course, you can write what you are going to find. For example, you have to examine the systems, right? So maybe on auscultation, you are finding maybe crepitation, so you're finding bronchi. So you definitely have to mention that. So, right, I had skipped that part, I guess. So if you had mentioned, then good. So yes, it's important to mention the respective findings. So if you have got a positive finding, if you have got something, then you should mention it. But if you haven't, then there's no need to bother about the other systemic findings. Because a lot of times the examiners don't actually get time. Like here also, like we can also go on with this discussion today till 9 p.m. But it's not feasible, right? We are trying to keep it 1 hour. So it's already 7. So in your actual examination also, the examiner is going to take a lot of exams, right? So a lot of times those things get skipped. So definitely you should mention any finding that you get, but my suggestion is that please focus on the important parts. Okay, so because that is what is very important. Okay, so thank you so much for presenting today's case. I really appreciate that you have come up in the last webinar also, Vipanya had come up voluntarily to present the case. So for the others who are watching, this is my suggestion that they are our subscribers, and we are providing them this opportunity to present the case. If you have observed carefully at the beginning of the discussion when the webinar started, when I told her to present the case, she got a little shaky. She, messed up a few stuff here and there in the beginning. That is entirely normal because a lot of, unknown people are watching this webinar. So in the exam also, you are going to get an unknown examiner, and he's going to be like way more, maybe, different than me, way more difficult to deal with than me, because he's been, conducting examiners maybe before I was born, before we were all born, that is. So facing an examiner of such sort needs a bit of courage, needs a bit of practice. So what I want to highlight is that please practice presenting the case, because that is where we sort of stutter and we cannot express ourselves properly despite knowing so many things. Viva is usually better, as you have observed that whenever I am asking her the question, she knows the answer and she can answer. But when I just told her to present the case, she got a little bit confused at the beginning. So that's normal, but you need to clear this fear before the final exam. There are still maybe 3 to 3.5 months left. We don't exactly know when the examinations are going to occur this year, but most probably I think it's going to occur around January, sort of. So you have October, you have November, you have December. Regarding the content, we are definitely working hard to finish them off. So surgery will be over by the end of this month, and I'll be adding videos like maybe in October, in November, and December also, because I might feel that this topic is also important for the exam, so I might just add it. So it's not that something ends on a particular date. So we will of course say that surgery has been uploaded completely, but it can be that I might feel that we need to discuss something else and I might upload a video. Lastly, as always, I would like to get some suggestions that we are conducting webinar on case presentations. If you like to, have webinars on something else, you can always tell us. We would like to have your feedback. Maybe if you want to have a webinar on, say, instrument, we can conduct it. If you want to have a webinar on question answer discussion, we can have it. If you want to have a webinar on writing answers, how to write answers, because I think throughout this whole year, maybe you have been, not in the practice of writing answers. Maybe you are sitting at home, maybe you are going through some books, but you have not written maybe a single answer this whole year because semesters and other examinations have not been conducted, right? So you need to practice writing answers as well. So you can come up with suggestions. If you want to, you can write it in the chat box. After some maybe 1 to 2 minutes, we are going to conclude this session.